Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Thursday, March 20th, 2025. It's about 2:30 p.m. And we are looking at another bill today, H 479, and Act relating to housing. We'll have a walkthrough. And we have Cameron here from Legislative Council. We have James Duffy back. We got 2 out of 4 bills today, James. And fiscal analyst from Joint Fiscal Office. And we have Representative Macaulay, the chair of House General, and Rep. Wozniak from Ways and Means, who's the bill reporter. So we have lots of people we can ask questions of. We will start by doing sort of a high-level view of the bill itself. Then we'll ask James to talk about the fiscal note, and then the legislators can answer other questions that aren't those things. So, take it away, please.
Perfect. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. Good afternoon. Surprised, given the members of the committee, we don't have the basketball game going on in the background. My apologies, sir. My apologies. Okay.
So are we looking at the Ways and Means report or
This is the bill as introduced, and then I would be happy to walk through quickly the Ways and Means amendment as well. That's 4 instances of amendment, but it's really only 2 substantive changes. And so this is H 479 as it came out of the Committee on General and Housing. And Madam Chair, I will generally speak to each of the sections and, you know, in respect of your time, try to be relatively high level. If you all have any questions, feel free to stop me, ask, or collect me, you know, outside of the room. Happy to answer.
Okay.
So I'm sharing my screen here. We're on page 2. The first section here makes changes to the VHIP program. This is the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program. For those who may not be aware, this is a program operated through the Department of Housing and Community Development. What they do is they give out funds to certain nonprofit and other non-governmental entities, and those entities will then, they could be governmental, they will then loan money or grant money to landlords who then rehabilitate or build new rental housing units. This section is going to make a few changes to the VHIP program. Starting here, the first change is the administration is requesting to add this subsection B to ensure that what this would do is it would exempt the entities that are actually giving out the loans. It would exempt them from Vermont's licensed lender laws. So, you know, these are in some instances just nonprofit housing organizations. They're not banks, they're not financial institutions. They are making loans, forgivable loans. And so this is just wanting to make sure for the purposes of this program only, we're not going to treat them as a financial institution. Okay. Moving into subsection D, this is the top of page 3. There's a slight change in how the funding can go out. Ultimately, there's no change in the amount of dollars that can go to a given project. Currently, they can give up to $70,000 if the project, and I should scroll back up, forgive me. What you see being struck out here in the sub I, up to $70,000 can be given if the landlord is going to bring the unit up to meet the applicable accessibility requirements under Vermont access rules. So kind of a higher bar, if you will, than just bringing the unit up to, you know, standard code and habitability standards. If they're wanting to bring it up to additional access, they can get up to 70 or 50,000 if they're just bringing the unit online. Again, as you can see, the language in the sub 2, we're simply saying 50,000 for rehab up to an additional 20 if you want to get them to the Vermont access standard. So there's not really a substantive change there.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm going to skip over some of these minor language pieces. There's not a lot of substantive things going on here. Trying to expand the cooperation and then trying to clarify here on the bottom of this page individuals who are approved to receive Medicaid. So these amendments here are kind of small s substantive. I'm going to pause here, though, under this subsection 2, because here's where we're going to get into one of the substantive changes for VHIP. Currently, under VHIP, a landlord can receive either a grant or a 5-year loan, or they can receive a 10-year loan. Both of those, grants or 5-year loans, 10-year loans, they have the same requirements that the landlord has to comply with under current law, which is the landlord must lease the unit to an individual who is one of these populations. So it either has to be an individual exiting homelessness, an individual actively working with an immigrant or refugee resettlement program, etc. What these changes that you're seeing on page 3 moving into page 4, they're adding that the department can rent, or excuse me, the landlord can rent to an entity that will hold a master lease for individuals who meet those populations. So instead of having to lease directly to an individual, they can lease to an entity that's going to hold a master lease for those people.
Could you give me an example of what I'm envisioning out of state people holding a master lease for something, and I'm not thinking that's what the intent is. So
I imagine it more of some sort of nonprofit housing entity holding a master lease to then lease to individuals that they're working with.
as opposed to their
Having to go directly to the
sort of
individual.
hub and spoke almost. Okay, got it. All right,
So-
John, you have a question?
There's no definition of that in for the,
Definition of
of
what?
what you just said. I'm sorry, I know.
Well, the language here is an organization that will hold a master lease. So it is,
So it could be
the
open.
definition of organization is not defined.
Okay, that's right. Thank you.
Okay, so again, each of these different ways in which funds can go out, the landlords have to lease to an individual among one of these populations. The change here on the bottom of page 4, as you can see, this is a subsection F, which is applicable requirements to 10-year forgivable loans. And the proposal is to strike all of those populations, moving to page 5. You don't have to lease to all these populations anymore. As a landlord, what you can do is you can lease the unit for fair market rent. And just want to make sure there's no questions about.
Yeah, we're just absorbing that.
Exactly,
So-
exactly.
So fair market.
And that is
So what
set by.
happens to, is there some, shouldn't we have some percentage being affordable?
So my understanding of the reason this is being requested from the administration, what they have testified to publicly is this is what the program was prior to last year, when last session, language was inserted at some point during the session to require the 10-year forgivable loans to meet the same requirement as the 5-year forgivable loans. So previously, this is what the program was, where if you get a 5-year loan or a grant, you must lease the unit to one of these populations, one of these individuals among these populations.
Yeah.
If you get a 10-year grant, then you can lease the unit for fair market rent
For the whole 10 years.
for the 10 years. Yes, ma'am.
Seems opposite. Tom,
I,
getting old.
so I'm aware of VHIP 1.0, which was used with the initial money coming from, it was funded through, federal dollars, so it's like VHIP 2.0, which I think is what this is amending, was also intended to have, I think what you're saying is that what you're implying here is that the VHIP 2.0 had this 10-year. Then at the end of the year, at some point, there was language inserted that also made the 10-year loan had to be available to people with at a certain criteria, that it was not just a program to create apartments that didn't have any connection to criteria that the previous ones. Is that right?
That is my general understanding. Yes, sir. I'm going to say it back to you just to make sure I understood correctly. You know, my understanding of how it works is, again, the 5 years and the grants, there are these populations that have to be served. When the landlord brings the unit online, they have to identify an individual who is among these populations to try to lease to. There are certain provisions in the event that they can't find anyone, but primary expectation is you lease it to one of those populations, one individual among those populations. The 10-year loans were, you have to maintain the unit at a fair market rent. And that changed last year where they became the exact same. If you look at the language in current statute, they are the same. Whether you're doing a 5-year loan or you're doing a 10-year loan, you have to try to lease to an individual who falls within one of these populations. As you can see, this is all the language in the 10-year loan that's being struck. And it's the same language that's within the section related to the 5-year loans. And my understanding is this is a reversion back to how the program was prior to last year.
We'll noodle on that. Mike, did you have a question?
So I guess I'm just to make sure I understand, this is kind of trade-off that for a longer amount of time, the landlord has restrictions on how much they can charge in rent, but less restriction on who they rent to versus on the shorter one.
Yeah, I think this is a policy decision for you all, right? What I've heard the administration testify is if the programs are required to do the same thing, all of the landlords are going to go for a 5-year loan. Why do I want to restrict the unit that I own and who I can rent to if you're going to put the same requirements on me for a longer period of time? So by allowing for something to be at fair market rent as opposed to mandating that I lease to an individual amongst this subset of people, it kind of gives more options to landlords. They may go with the 10-year option, in which case they're trying to keep the housing unit at a fair market rent for a longer period of time. That, I think, is the argument that will be made. You all, as the policymakers, decide whether you think that that is valuable.
So what I'm wondering is, if they have $1 million, the VHIP grant program, let's just pretend it's $1 million. Do we typically say no more than 20% can be the fair market rent and the rest can be, is that in here somewhere?
It is, but that is not current law. So that will,
Okay, so
yes,
we're gonna get there.
that will allow me to just move right here to the next amendments that we have. This is going to be on page 6, subsection G. So there was conversation amongst the House General and Housing Committee about the fact that, okay, if we're going to go in the direction that the administration is requesting, we want to ensure that, and I'm saying we as in the House General Committee wants to ensure that there is a certain amount of funds that are being set aside that have to be used for these 5-year grants and 5-year loans. And so this is what subsection G does. It says annually, the department has to establish a minimum allocation of funding set aside to be used for 5-year grants and forgivable loans to serve eligible households pursuant to subsection E. And then it sets that at a minimum of 30%.
So 70% can go to fair market value.
Ultimately, at the end of how the money gets out, potentially, yes. And what I mean is potentially is it's going to depend on who is the landlords that are asking and what they're asking for. Ultimately, I imagine the department is going to sit here and tell you 100% could go to the 5-year grants or 5-year loans if that's what the landlords want.
Right.
Right. But it is saying that a minimum of 30% must be set aside for that program or that aspect of the program.
For 1 year.
Yes, sir.
It's only for 1 year?
If after if the funds that are given to, if we're giving them $100 for the project or for this whole thing, if that 30% set aside is on page, this is on page.
You'll be on the next page, page 7. Yes, sir.
So number 4, it just says if that 30% isn't used for 5-year forgivable loans for certain criteria, then it would be added to the rest of whatever for
10-year.
Correct. There's requirements in here, before you get to the sub 4, there's some requirements that the department has to consult with the Agency of Human Services and what that threshold should be set at annually. So they could go above 30% if they felt that it was appropriate, and there has to be consultation in order to do that each year. Representative Stevens is correct. When you get to the sub 4, they're only required to maintain that set aside for 1 year. And at that point, if the funds haven't been used, then they could be opened up and used for 10-year loans.
And then Wayne.
Yeah, on page page before that, 6. That section, that's D1. It says the set aside shall be a minimum of 30% of funds dispersed annually. So that's annually. And then you get down to 4, right below that. So you're probably doing this every year. Getting
Right, but the question is, do all the funds get out every year? If they did 250,000 of the 300, that they have $1 million appropriation for a year. At least 300,000 has to go to,
This is what state is doing. This is rent.
no, these are grants.
Grants.
Some of them are
Grants,
grants
it up.
and some of them are forgivable loans.
But it's to private homeowners to do this.
Nonprofits.
It could be homeowners, it could be an
It's not,
ADU.
it's not solely for private people, but yes, it's,
Yes, it could be
did we
something.
go through how this works?
Yeah,
You want him to you mean have him finish up, or you want?
No, I'm just, in general, did we talk about how the VHIP program works?
I mentioned at the top, Representative Stevens, I don't think you had come in yet. I just mentioned at the very top, my understanding is, the department has funds and then they provide those to certain intermediaries, nonprofit entities, could be government entities, et cetera. And then they loan or grant the funds out to private landlords who then rehab units or bring new rental units online. And then when they do so, they have to match a certain percentage of the funds that they're receiving. And then depending on whether they're doing grants or 5-year loans, or under this recommended change, 10-year loans, they have to then lease that unit out to certain individuals or meet certain affordability thresholds for a specific period of time.
Don has a question.
Just real quickly, I'm almost back at the beginning here, but you referenced 50,000 per unit for rehab recreation, right? That part, and up to an additional 20 per unit may be available for specific elements. Those can be grants or loans. They don't need to be each. Like, could it just be all a grant or all loan? Is there a
Yes, but depending on if you take a grant or if you take a loan, it's going to depend on what the requirements are on you to then lease the unit in a specific way afterwards.
So I'll make sure that's clear.
Yes, sir.
Actually,
Oh, wait, go ahead.
So it feels like these changes are being made to make sure that, A, we take care of one category, but also don't make it so restrictive that we have a roadblock in terms of how fast we can get housing rehabilitated. And so does that sound right? So that we're trying to get all the money out the door. We don't want to make it too restrictive, but we want to make sure that certain categories have it available.
I think that's, if I may,
Yeah,
I think that's the global idea. If I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, the process for this is not simply going to you have to go to the nonprofit housing agency that's handling the money. You have to file an application that reflects a certain amount of money. But you, the property owner, you need to pay for this. Is a reimbursement. So it's not like saying, oh yeah, here's your check for $50,000. You still have to have the capital to put up front to do this work. You have to be pre-approved for the program. And then depending on how it works, then you get the money back. Or you get the money reimbursed. And then as you pay it back or as you grant it, there are also tax implications here. So there may be, if you're, Cameron, I believe if it's a grant and it's a 5-year grant, you're getting charged income for that. So, I mean, it's not as quick and easy as it sounds. And it's you still have to have capital through the unit. And then there are implications afterwards. And I'm not saying that this program is deceptive in any way. It's just the way you described it is the way that we would sell it and advertise it. But there's just realities here that make it as complicated as any other state program can be. It's just the idea is to say, if I have a unit that can be repaired, this is a program that may help me.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say. I mean, all the technical and detail things can hold things up. But basically, we don't want the mere fact that all of them are categorized in that one 5-year program would discourage anybody from getting money, so you have to get on the table and not getting the work done.
You still have to you have to have the money to do the work first, man. So
Right. He just doesn't want, you want it to be more flexible.
No, I'm suggesting that this language makes it more.
Right, that's what I'm saying. You'd like the more
Yeah, I
flexibility.
like that.
We can argue the percentage stuff. Go ahead.
I just want to follow up because I think the description here is different. When it says a forgivable loan, that typically doesn't mean that you would need all the money up front. That would be
the
more.
way the program is set up.
That's a reimbursement.
There's fine lines, there's this, and we can go look at the website, you know, it's pretty clear on the website, it's more than it is in statute.
And I should just say that I actually have used the VHIP loan before. I'm really big fan of this program. I talk more about it, like, later, but I was probably in an earlier version, so I think the rules could be a little different than when I participated. But
Let's continue, please.
Okay. So I'm moving us back to page 7, just bringing us back to the conversation we were having. Reverend Stevens is correct. As I mentioned, as he mentioned, the set aside, again, there's that 30% amount of the funds appropriated annually have to be set aside for the grants or the 5-year loans. After 1 year, those are then subsequently available if they haven't been used, can open up to be used for either grants or 5-year loans, or then now for 10-year loans. That information has to be published annually. Then we're getting into the last 2 additions to this program. The first one is simply creating this as a revolving loan fund. Technically, I think the intention is for these to be either grants or forgivable loans. However, conceivably, there is the possibility of an individual needing to pay it back. And so this language is just ensuring that those funds can then be used for additional unit rehabilitation under the program. And then subsection J here is information that really was kind of worked out between House Human Services and the House General Committee to ensure that information was coming back to you all about what is happening with unit development and what is happening with the units subsequent to the requirements of the landlord expiring. So what you'll see here is on the sub 1 here, providing information on the number of units funded, the number of units rehabilitated, etc. Subdivision 2, for the first year after the expiration of the lease requirements, whether the unit is still occupied by a tenant who meets the qualifications of the subdivision. So this is for the grants or the 5-year loans. Remember the populations that have to be prioritized. For the first year after that 5-year requirement is up, are you still leasing the unit to an individual who meets those criteria or not? Then the sub 3 here is similarly for the 10-year loans. For the first year after those requirements are up, so year 11, what did you maintain the rent at that level or did it skyrocket from there? So just trying to get information about what the landlords are doing with the units after the expiration of the requirements, and then turnover of the units. So that's an annual report that would come to you all. Okay. Moving on, section 2. This is the Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program. This is a program that currently exists. You all legislature have created this and provided funding to it in session law in the past. So kind of a one-time appropriation, one-time program. What the department is asking for, the Department of Housing, is wanting to put this in statute. And so that's why you'll see it's adding 10 VSA 700. So it's adding this new section right by where VHIP is. And this allows the department to issue out funds primarily for, we're moving to page 9 here. Here are the 3 categories where the department can issue funds. And it's up to $20,000 to manufactured housing communities to do small scale capital improvements to help, infill their vacant lots. They can award money directly to a manufactured homeowner to do any sort of compliance or habitability issues. And then finally, on the sub 3, they can issue out money to pay for, foundation slabs, site preparation, et cetera.
So a question you just reminded me, so that we're putting this in statute as opposed to session law. Is VHIP already in statute or is it in session law?
It is already in statute.
It's already in statute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, other than that, there really are no changes to how this program currently exists in session law. So this is just moving it over. There's nothing that's substantively changing about it. A few minor word tweaks, that's it.
Okay.
Moving to the top of page 10, we're in subsection 3. This is going to create the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. This is a fund that would live within the Vermont Bond Bank, as you see there on the subsection A. And the primary purpose of this is to, you can see kind of in sub B and then D1. The purpose is really to, D2. Is to provide infrastructure or provide funding to municipalities to expand infrastructure specifically related to the expansion of housing. So what I will point to is E2, program parameters. The program shall provide low-interest loans or bonds to municipalities to expand infrastructure capacity. Eligible activities include engineering and planning, design, construction of wastewater and water systems, transportation investments, other eligible activities, et cetera. But the point is, they do have to, as you can see in the subsection E here, the projects have to be associated with housing. So it has to demonstrate that it will create reserve capacity necessary for new housing, a direct link to housing unit production. And so it is specifically tied to those criteria. Okay. And then there's some information here on what has to be in the application, what's the criteria, what are the award terms, loan amounts, maximum terms, interest rates, et cetera. I'm not going to go through this line by line unless anybody has questions and I could, okay, there we go. All right.
Sorry.
No, understood. Page 13. Okay, Universal Design Study Committee. This is a committee that would be created specifically to explore and develop the implementation of statewide universal design standards for all residential buildings. You have the membership here on sub B. Powers and duties, again, it's specifically about development and implementation of universal design standards for residential buildings. There is the assistance of the Department of Housing and Community Development. There has to be a report issued November 1st of 2025. Again, I think there were, apologies for the scroll, there are 16 members of the committee and they're listed there ending on page 14. What I think might be relevant to you all is it is a maximum of, I believe it is 6 meetings, and there's 2 legislators, 1 member of the House, 1 member of the Senate, both for legislative members and any other individual on the committee who's not otherwise compensated for their time is eligible for per diem reimbursement under the language here. And then they appropriated $15,000 from the general fund in FY26 for this purpose.
Universal design standard, like a cookie cutter house? Is that what's universal design supposed to encompass everything?
No, sir. I think this is more to address certain instances to assist individuals who may have a disability or individuals who may be looking to age in place, et cetera. So I think it is more focused on how to develop design standards, standards related to hallway size, things of that nature.
So it's like an ADA.
No, not just. I mean, we'll get, when we have the reps up, we'll talk, but I think, Tony, you have
It's following up what Cameron was saying. It's not specifically ADA. It's just about being able to create architectural and schematic, that it just expands the design so that people with different disabilities have more easy access. I mean, any home built in the 1940s you can't get a wheelchair in, it doesn't have to be ADA accessible. Anyway, that details can come from elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think the idea is also it helps with permitting ahead of time. You have certain things, it's almost like pre-permitting.
Just the way it was worded, it sounded like you're gonna design, universally design every building.
Little boxes on the hillside, yeah. Okay.
I'm going to bring us back to page 17. This is a section, it is amending, as you can see, it's information that's required to be passed on to the tax department from municipalities in relation to compiling information for, grand lists. And we're adding information that the municipalities shall provide an extract of the assessor database, also referred to as computer-assisted mass appraisal system, to the Department of Taxes. My understanding of this, and I would, if you all have specific questions, I would probably need to defer to others because I have somewhat limited knowledge in this space, but this is information that the municipalities have, the tax department is putting in here so they can just access the data in the database. And one, as the municipality is uploading all of their other information, they upload this as well, and then they can make it available to their housing partners for purposes of understanding what the housing stock is across the state.
That will help also with the grand list, I think, the statewide grand list and assessment. Multiple purposes, I guess.
Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. Page 18, this is VHFA, First Generation Homebuyer Program and Down Payment Assistance. What this is doing, and I'm going to pause here at the definition section. Well, I'm going to come back to the definition. On page 19 here, it's adding the ability of VHFA to issue up to $250,000 per year in first-year tax credits for the purposes of funding their first-generation homebuyer program. This program has been funded previously in session law, and that is why or where this definition comes from. So there's no change in this definition to what they are already using as they're funding this program currently.
And this is staying in session law.
No, ma'am, this would be going into statute because as this is written, it would give them the ability to issue these credits moving forward each year up to an aggregate amount of 1.25 million.
Okay, questions on?
These credits are purchased, or are we funding them?
My understanding, the way this works, and the HFA, I think, does a better job of explaining this than I probably will be able to, but they're tax credits, and my understanding is entities will buy them, so they will give VHFA $250,000, and then they can subsequently use that as a tax credit moving forward. So VHFA will collect it, and they'll have $250,000 at that point that they can then use to fund the first generation homebuyer program.
So maybe you can get the details from joint fiscal as well. Is that?
Yeah, there's no sense in me trying to untease it for you, but.
Yeah.
Okay, so 250,000 per year in tax credits here. There's another program that's being added, or I should say extended. So as you can see, this is on page 20. The VHFA currently has the authority to issue up to 250,000 in first year credits for their down payment assistance program. And that runs through fiscal year 2026.
I see.
What this is doing is extending it for another 5 years. And Ways and Means is doing a little bit of cleanup because we really don't need a new subsection for this. We just need to extend the program here, and I'll get to that in just a second. Those are the tax credits for VHFA. Under section 7, there is a report which is required from the Department of Housing and Community Development to come back to the General Assembly about the potential creation of a statewide and regional land bank. So land banks, I think the intention here is these are entities, could be nonprofits or semi or quasi-governmental entities, but they have the ability to step in, purchase property, hold property, purchase, vacant buildings, et cetera, and hold them in potential, to be developed, at a future date. So there was a report that was issued actually earlier this year. It just didn't have explicit, legislative statutory language. And so what this is asking them to do is hey, your report was great. You brought up a lot of great points about land banks. We want you to come back and give us specific legislative language and funding
So
options.
there isn't any cost to this one.
Correct. Okay. This next few sections on page 21 are related to housing appeals in, municipal and
So we don't,
zoning.
well, interesting, but I think we'll continue.
And I couldn't explain it to you if you wanted me to,
But
so.
this will be, when it's on the floor, that'll be discussed.
So apologies for the Zoom. I'm going to keep moving down. Till we get to page 28. And we're dealing with brownfields. And this is typically where I would defer to Michael O'Grady, one of my colleagues on this. I can just generally say, one of the amendments here is to try to get A&R to prioritize, brownfield assessments related to housing. There is a requirement to issue a report. And then there is a tweak in section 15, a funding piece in fiscal year 2024. And my understanding is the administration, so this is the bottom of page 29, top of page 30. And as you can see, fiscal year 2024, 2.5 million from the general fund. It is being appropriated to, and they're requesting to change it to the environmental contingency fund.
That's how much was done last year. That's not a new appropriation because it's not underlined, right?
Correct.
So it's just moving who gets the money.
Correct. And my understanding is it's a request from A&R and it will give them more flexibility on how to spend those dollars.
Okay.
Okay, moving to page 30 under section 16. This section, as it says here in the title, it's going to authorize municipalities to issue a 1% tax on short-term rentals. It has to be a recommendation from the legislative body, then subsequently voted on by a majority of individuals present and voting at a special meeting, annual or special meeting.
Legislative body being the select board, not us.
Correct. Correct. I will circle back to it here in a second. One of the recommended amendments from Ways and Means is to remove this section.
The short-term rental section.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay.
Good to know. Thank you.
We have changes to the landlord certificate. So last year, the General Assembly made some tweaks to the information that's required to be provided in the landlord certificate. My understanding is the administration is asking for that to be changed slightly. And so section 17 will repeal the change that went into effect last year, or the change that you all enacted last year. It goes into effect this July. So we're repealing that. And then we're subsequently replacing it with very similar language, but language that the administration feels is more feasible, is my understanding. Okay, if you have any questions about the specifics, I'd be happy to talk offline if anyone has them. And then this information right here is the same as what was passed last year. They have to provide this information to the General Assembly in the aggregate each December. Section 19, VHFA offsite construction. This is a report. So there is appropriated $250,000 from the general fund to DHCD to go to VHFA to further develop recommendations from a report that they issued this year related to offsite housing construction. So as you can see on page 33, here are the things that VHFA would have to continue to look into and come back to you all with the report. And it's all primarily related to, development of offsite construction.
So this is the new term for like manufactured homes or things that are put together somewhere else and then or built somewhere else and put together on site, on the house site.
Yes, ma'am. So it would include both things like mobile homes, manufactured homes, modular homes, etc.
So it's developing almost like a business plan of sorts.
I think that could be part of what they report back to you.
Or not a specific business plan, but to see if this business is this something that can be, I'm just curious, like, is this where like Pepsi or, any of the other economic development loans, whether it's Vita, is that what those programs would be available for? I don't know enough.
Not really. We can hear from the committees maybe.
Yeah, I'll just,
See what, if they've got more information about that, but,
great, thank you.
Bottom of that page, report, interim report, January 26th, final report, December of 26.
okay.
Okay, now we're moving into the appropriation sections. I should say further appropriation sections. Page 34, section 20. Okay. This section provides funding to the Department of Housing and Community Development to fund the positions that they are asking for moving forward. So there are 3 new positions for a total of $450,000 that they are requesting. My understanding is 2 of those positions are intended to go to the VHIP program. One of those positions is intended to go to the Manufactured Home Improvement Repair Program.
Were those in the governor, this is new appropriation, new positions, they weren't in the governor's budget, correct?
My understanding is these are, yes.
Okay,
I remember this overview that we funded one in the draft proposal we were looking at this morning.
yeah, but I'm just wondering why that part is, I guess we have to create the positions, but well, we'll find out, if the money was in there already, but somebody else will tell us that, okay.
And then there's 300,000 to continue to fund 2 limited service positions that they currently have.
That was in the budget already.
My understanding is both of these are, yes.
Oh, okay,
Okay. And then moving into section 21. And this is all of the recommendations of the House General and Housing Committee for funding associated with housing. So 27 million to BHCB for the following purposes, moving to the top of page 35. 25 million to provide support and enhance capacity for the production and preservation of affordable mixed income rental housing and home ownership units, including improvements to manufactured homes and communities, permanent homes and emergency shelter for those experiencing homelessness, recovery residences, housing available to farm workers, refugees, and individuals who are eligible to receive Medicaid funded home and community-based services. And then 2 million to implement the resident services program. The resident services program was passed last year. It just wasn't funded. And it would probably be best for me to let them speak to if you have any questions specific about what the resident services program is. I have the language. If anybody's interested, I can hand it to you. We have, as you can see, 41,735,000 to Department of Housing and Community Development for the following purposes: 20 million to VHFA for the middle income and rental housing revolving loan funds, 15 million for the Vermont Bond Bank, 4 million for VHIP, 2 million for Manufactured Home Improvement Repair Program. Now we're on page 36, 500,000 granted to the 5 Neighbor Works America affiliated home ownership centers to continue home buyer education and financial literacy counseling. 235,000 to Home Share for funding case management positions and an intake coordinator. 400,000 to AHS to grant to Cathedral Square to continue the SASH pilot program. 373,000 to the Vermont State Colleges to help develop work-based learning in HVAC programs. I'm moving to the top of page 37. 448,500 to the Department of Labor for a 3-year grant to Associated General Contractors of Vermont for the purpose of promoting and expanding training and certificate programs specific to construction and building trades. And then 625,000 to the Department of Health for the following purposes: 300,000 for 3 new recovery residences certified by the Vermont Alliance for Recovery Residences, and 325,000 to cover first month fees for individuals entering a certified recovery residence. I may not be the best person in the room to speak as far as what matches what's in the governor's budget or not, and what is above other. Specifically to the recovery residences piece, there was conversation in the committee about the funds that have been appropriated by Human Services, and the intention of this being in addition to that, so.
And I've had conversations with, Chair Wood about that.
Yeah, okay. Excellent.
That's the bill. Sorry, very quickly, the Ways and Means Amendment, which was voted out, as I said, it would remove the section related to the municipal tax on short-term rentals. It would remove that. And then, remember, we were talking, apologies for the scroll, we were talking about the tax credits for VHFA.
I'm reading that on there.
Going, yep, all the way, and I guess I could just pull their amendment up here, apologies. They want to sunset this first generation home buyers, the tax credits. They want to sunset that after 5 years, as opposed to just allowing it into. So the first instance of amendment that they have is just fixing some drafting issues in that section. So it's just striking section 6, putting it back in, fixing some things. As I said, it extends this out to 2031 as opposed to creating an entirely new subsection, which isn't needed. And then section 2, or the second instance of amendment, I should say, would remove, as you can see, striking through the first generation home buyer and striking out the tax credits, and that would go into effect beginning fiscal year 2031. And because of that, as you see, you need a new effective date, which is saying that section 6A, repealing that, sunset July 1, 2030.
Any questions on the bill so far? All right. Don't go away, but thank you very much. And James, do you want to have your turn, please? We had 2 very short fiscal notes this morning, and now we're making up for that.
The record, James Duffy, Joint Fiscal Office. Madam Chair, I'm going to take a second to pull the fiscal note up on the screen behind me, if that's of interest to the committee. It may be
The
helpful.
audience may want to see that, so that's fine. We should all have copies, or it's in our screens.
Okay. So what you have in front of you and on the screen behind me is the fiscal note for H479, an act relating to housing. In general, this bill would fund and modify a variety of existing programs relating to housing and housing supply, create new ones, and as well as establish various policy directives that are aimed at increasing the supply, affordability, and accessibility of housing in Vermont. This bill comes to you by way of the General Housing Committee, by which it was introduced, and it was recommended by House Ways and Means with 2 amendments yesterday, which Cameron ran through for you. Just as a little bit of background on those 2 amendments as they pertain to the fiscal impact of the bill. Neither amendment offered by House Ways and Means affects the appropriations in the bill. Both of those, one of those amendments pertaining to short-term rentals, local option taxes, does not affect Joint Fiscal Office's fiscal impact assessment. And the second, which would sunset one of the 2 affordable housing fits that Cameron described after 5 years, also reduces the longer term 5-year fiscal impact in terms of revenues from this bill, but does not touch the appropriations. Yeah.
Just on the local option, 2 questions. One, does that apply for the sharing will pilot the state end of $75 million?
And my understanding is, as proposed in the short-term rental provision in this bill, those revenues flowed directly to the municipalities, and there would not have been any revenue sharing with the state from that local option tax for short-term.
Unlike the other revenue, local option, there's no revenue share, is that correct? Okay. And secondly, this would be on top of the extra 3% that we added last year. So
And in addition to the already enabling 1% local option tax.
As well as the statewide meals and convenience tax.
Did the 9%.
Yes.
Plus 1% plus the 3%, and now you can do another 1%.
That's correct. And that was proposed to be removed by House Ways and Means.
I'm just trying to understand, so it's essentially a 15% tax.
Yeah, it would add an additional layer on top of the existing short-term rental surcharge. That's correct. And local options. So, Madam Chair, what I would propose to do, if it's amenable to you, is first run through the appropriations.
Okay,
And then as I will discuss as well, the tax credits, which represent the revenue piece of this bill. But I thought in the interest of the committee, would focus on the appropriations and then see how much time the committee would like to discuss the tax.
what I would love, because I know there's some of this, it's already in the governor's bill, and what I'm trying to understand is what's new money and what's already in the governor's recommended. I don't think 71.5 million is all new money.
That's correct. So
Try not to like have heart palpitations.
You're correct. So the top line fiscal impact of this bill would be $71.8 million, as you can see under the fiscal summary up top. Of that, 71.6 roughly would be appropriations for various new and existing programs, staff position studies. This is approximately 25 million higher than the total top line number from the fiscal year 26 governor's recommended proposals for housing items. And as we go through each of the individual appropriations, I can flag for the committee what the differences are there. Sure.
Okay,
So a very kind of top level review of the appropriations here, that 71.6, just under 71.6 appropriation number for programs includes the creation of the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund within the Vermont Bond Bank. That is the only brand new program introduced by this bill. There are various other programs which are proposed to be funded on a more permanent basis or expanded basis in these appropriations, but the Infrastructure Sustainability Fund would be new to the Vermont Bond Bank. As I mentioned before, continuing various existing programs such as VHIP. The appropriations establish 3 new full-time classified positions within state government, as well as extending to limited service positions. The appropriations also include a variety of one-time grants or appropriations to housing service providers outside of state government. And then there are a smaller piece of this appropriation that's devoted to studies, one-time studies for strategies to increase housing supply and affordability. That is the universal design study that Cameron mentioned earlier, as well as the offsite construction report, which is proposed to be completed by VHFA under this bill. So with that being said, I will scroll down to table 1 in the fiscal note, which goes through each of these appropriations line by line. As I just mentioned, there are 2 one-time appropriations for studies contained in this bill and the proposed FY26 budget here. That's $15,000 for the Universal Design Study Committee and $250,000 for that offsite construction report.
so I want you to pause right there.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
Either of these in the governor's recommendation. That's what we're trying to.
Neither one of these studies is contained in the governor's recommendation. Yes.
I knew they weren't, but if they already did this offsite construction report, did I just hear that there already was one and they have to kind of make it more specific?
My understanding is there's been several either state supported or kind of within the public policy space studies done in Vermont, specific to Vermont within the last several years. I can't speak to the exact details of those, but this would build off of several previous studies, at least one of which has received some level of state support in the past.
This seems like an excessive amount of money to update a report. But we'll hear from the committee. Do you have a question?
Very quickly, I was just going to add to the committee, the specifics that the report would be required to investigate are the recommendations from the report they just issued. So they issued this report, here's our recommendations, legislature, you need to look into these things. And so this report is saying, okay, you told us to look into those things, go look into those things.
Okay, and so, James, your office come up with that number of the 250? Did you all like do a little research?
JFO was not involved with,
Was not involved.
the proposal, kind of the devising.
Sometimes they ask you, if we want to do this report and this study, how much is it going to cost? But that didn't happen for this one. Okay, thank you.
So there are 5 positions proposed, 3 full-time classified, 2 limited service, for a total of $750,000. These are both contained in the proposed bill and the governor's
So
recommended.
this is not new.
This is contained within the fiscal year 26 governor, yes.
Okay. Okay.
The next items, so the Infrastructure Sustainability Fund, which would be funds appropriated to the Department of Housing and Community Development and then granted to the Vermont Bond Bank for this purpose. The governor's proposal had included $9.1 million for this provision. This bill represents 5.9 beyond fiscal year 26 governor for that purpose. The Mobile Home Improvement Program, and MHER, that $2 million is the same between the GovRec and this bill. The next item, the Middle Income Homeownership Development Program and Rental Housing Revolving Loan Fund. The proposal from the administration had been to fund each of these programs at $15 million for a total of $30 million. Proposed in this bill is a $20 million appropriation across both programs.
So $10 million.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You lost me.
Middle income home ownership.
Right.
The governor had put in 30 for the 2 of them, $15 million each. And they're doing 20, so it's a $10 million
So the
reduction.
VHIP has nothing to do with it.
No, it's the middle income, middle section. The 20 million is,
And the $4 million proposed to be appropriated to VHIP in this bill is also the same as the
Right.
126 cover. The next item in this table is composed of appropriations to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. These are, the first item is $25 million above the base recommended by the governor's proposal. So
That's-
25 appropriated to VHIP in that first line for this subset of the table is above and beyond.
right, okay. Yeah.
Maybe it's more of a question for Cameron. Are there any strings attached to that they can't put that into land conservation? Does it have to all go for housing? Is it left up to VAC board?
I can pull up the legislative language here. My understanding is that, Cameron, touch base.
I'm just making sure I'm checking the kind of land conservation. It's pretty flexible, but it's used language that the General Assembly has used in the past. But in reviewing it, it is tied to housing broadly. So it says production and preservation of affordable mixed income rental housing and homeownership units, improving manufactured homes and manufactured home communities, permanent homes and emergency shelters, recovery residences, housing available to farm workers, and refugees and individuals eligible to receive Medicaid funded home and community-based services. So it's tied to housing in that sense, but other than that, very broad in the types of housing.
That was the language that we put in a couple of years ago. And it includes for housing for individuals with disabilities, things like that. Okay.
But on this line, it does say preservation programs.
Those preservation programs may be more related to housing. So there are contracts that have been done over time. HUD funding usually have 30-year contracts. And so the preservation there is to retain housing that's been affordable and extend those contracts.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. The 25 million is 25 million above what the governor recommended in the base.
Above the base.
So that's the base plus another 25 million.
That's correct. And then the second line after that, on the VHCB appropriations, the resident services program, the $2 million proposed for resident services is also reflected in the governor's proposal.
They do not,
That's the $2 million for the residents
The services
services
in
program.
Govrec, okay.
Yep.
okay. And then the last one?
So this category, grants and appropriations to various non-governmental service providers. This kind of bucket of funds, which in this bill totals to just under 2.6 million, is composed of a variety of appropriations. I can go into some more detail about each of those, but I can tell you up front, only $500,000 of this roughly 2.6 million was contained in the governor's recommended FY26. That would be the $500,000 for a grant to NeighborWorks America.
Million increase here.
Excuse me, I actually misspoke. So the governor's recommended for this category would include both $500,000 that's granted to NeighborWorks as well as $1.2 million to recovery services, which is Cameron touched on that proposed briefly earlier.
800,000 new,
That's correct.
is that right?
And then contained in this bill, the 500,000 for NeighborWorks is reflected in this bill as well. There's $625,000 contained for recovery services relative to the 1.2 in the GovRec. There's a little bit of an asterisk there because there is a bill coming from the Committee on Human Services pertaining to appropriations for recovery services. And there's, I think, some interplay between those appropriations. So that in the budget process, there's kind of several appropriations being discussed for this purpose reflected in this bill and the AHS bill out of the Committee on Human Services.
So James, if we go to section 21 of the bill,
Sure.
will we see a breakout of that 2.851 million and who gets what?
Yes, and it's also contained in the fiscal note.
It is.
Yes, if we go into the next page of the fiscal note, you can see a more detailed description of each of those individual appropriations.
Well, it's only that 2.8 million that I want. Oh, that's on the very end of
At the very, yes, back page, thank you.
So if we look at that, which of those are already in the GovRec?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the $500,000 to DHPD to grant to NeighborWorks America, that's contained in the GovRec.
Okay.
And then those last two bullets, $300,000 to Department of Health and $325,000 for first month fees.
They're already in there.
They are $625,000 for recovery services relative to the 1.2.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. 1.2 million proposed in the GovRec.
Okay.
for that purpose.
So those other four, Home Share, Cathedral Square, Vermont State Colleges, and DOL, those are all new.
That's correct.
Okay. And can we talk about the tax credits, costs, and what that's doing to our budget? Wayne, go ahead.
I was just wondering, the last bullet, 325,000, was that in the recommend or is this extra?
You said it was.
It is?
I can speak to the amount proposed in the GovRec, was greater. Whether the governor's recommended budget included that specific appropriation for first month fees for individuals entering recovery services, I can't say at the moment, but I'm happy to follow up unless
And
somebody.
you're saying that 625 was in the GovRec for recovery residences?
The total number for recovery residences proposed in the GovRec was $1.2 million.
Okay.
Whether that included this specific provision for first month fees for individuals entering treatment.
Broken out. Tim, do you have a comment on that?
Well, the opioid settlement fund is being used to fund the recovery residences, and it's at 1.4 by the recommendation of the governor and the
Okay.
HHS.
So this wouldn't necessarily have to be general fund because it's in an opioid settlement fund?
Well, that is for an expansion of recovery housing.
Which one, the opioid or
No,
this one?
the 300,000 would come from general fund.
Okay,
If we don't cut what the opioid settlement committee said,
okay,
this would be for an additional 3 residences, which expands the network.
okay. So that was not.
It was in human services supports that.
Right, but it wasn't in the governor's budget.
No,
So actually, those two were not in the governor's budget.
So they are not,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. All right, so not in the governor. I'm trying to do a little
I know,
spreadsheet of my own
yeah.
to figure this out.
Apologies, Chair. Yes, so in saying that, in referring to recovery services, I can say that there was $1.2 million total appropriated or proposed in the GovRec. As to whether that would have included these two specific recovery residence
What was
provisions.
the 500,000 for neighborhood?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right. Now, can we talk about tax credits? Are you good, Wayne, or is that? Tell us how that's affecting our ability to do stuff in the budget.
So I'll start by saying the fiscal year 26 cost of both tax credit provisions. There are two tax credits at play here. The tax credits used to fund the down payment assistance program at VHFA and the tax credits used to fund the first generation home buyer program at VHFA. In fiscal year 26, there would only be $250,000 of new tax expenditures to issue those tax credits, right? So the fiscal year 26 costs of both these tax credits, it's $250,000. Now I say only because that's relative to the somewhat larger appropriation that we were just discussing. But there is the tax credit, the way both these programs work is that VHFA is authorized to issue new first year tax credits for 5 years. So in fiscal year 26, VHFA would be authorized to issue $250,000 of additional tax credits beyond current law for the first generation homebuyer assistance program. And it would then be authorized to issue $250,000 in tax credits for the subsequent 4 years. So the bill, as proposed to be amended by House Ways and Means, would see VHFA authorized for 5 years worth of $250,000 per year tax credit allocations. You can see in table 2 what the cost schedule would be both for the first gen home buyer program and the down payment assistance program. The reason the cost is zero for a down payment assistance program in FY26 is that FY26 tax credits for that program were already authorized through a previous statute and don't represent a new cost to the state in fiscal year 26. So as VHFA would issue new tax credits, new first year tax credits throughout each of these years, you would see the cost of the programs increase by $500,000 per year, $250,000 from the first generation homebuyer program, $250,000 from the down payment assistance program. As recommended by House Ways and Means, each of these tax credits will sunset after 5 years. Down payment assistance programs authorization to issue new tax credits would sunset in FY 2031, and the first generation homebuyer program's authorization to issue new credits would expire in 2030. So if you dig in on table 2 here, you see the new cost represented by this bill for the down payment assistance program peaks in FY 2031.
And I'll start going down.
And yes, and on the next page, you can see kind of the cost schedule as both of these start to decline.
Right.
And so the total cost as contained in this bill would reach zero for both programs by FY 2036.
So is this money that is not coming into the state as revenue?
It represents foregone tax revenue to the state. It's a tax expenditure. It's tax revenue Vermont could collect, but is not collected.
And this is not in the governor's recommended.
Correct.
So how big would, well, say someone was to get a tax credit, how much would it be? How much can you get? Is there any limit on how much they get, or is it the whole value of their taxes a year?
So the numbers you see contained in these tables are the numbers that could be sold to, say, lenders and not individual home buyers. There are individual specific caps on how much a particular home buyer can receive through either of these programs, which are contained in the statute.
You don't have to.
Okay, sure.
Can-
I think generally it's under 10,000 for most recipients, individual recipients of these tax credits.
Any questions about this from James at this point? Okay, I'm adding up the little spreadsheet, I'm almost there. Thank you, don't go away. Representative Mahali. Both come up to the table? Who knows where our questions are gonna come from? All right, I'm just gonna do this last one. Okay, I have plus 23,246,500.
That's,
Is that right?
I'm Mark Mahoney.
That was good.
Even six.
Everybody confuse yourselves and then we'll get out of there, sorry.
Thank you.
Teddy Wazzack, City, Washington.
Actually, I once calculated it a little while ago at 25, so that's about, seems to me in the ballpark. And what you just went through, I think you got an accurate read now on the numbers. I propose simply to answer, to direct my remarks only to questions that I heard come up. And nothing else.
So I saw you taking notes while we were
Yeah.
trying to understand the bill, so.
Right, I mean, I know what your time
If
constraint
you want
is.
to answer what you think you heard from us and then.
And then I'll just quickly. The VHIP, we had a compromise is what happened. The 5-year program had the exiting homeless requirements. The 10-year program, as of last year, also had it. The administration wanted to take it away. Why would anyone do the 10-year if it was the same? But we felt that that was a little much because if you took it away, we thought that everyone would just wouldn't use the 5-year and would just use a 10. So we asked the administration to see if they could come up with something, and they did. They were good, I think. But we pushed a little harder and came up with the 30% number, which is that for any given year, the appropriation, let's just say in a moment of largesse, this committee were to award $3 million to VHIP instead of 4, but 3, let's just say, well, that 30% of that would have to be available for homeless. Or these things turn over constantly, but for 1 year it would have to be, and then it could flip over to the 10-year.
But you don't mean, when the person goes in, they don't get it just for 1 year, that it's the money that we've appropriated, but they get to be there for 5 years.
Right. The way it works is that the landlord has an obligation. Oh, I should make this clear. Under the 10-year program, the landlord has an obligation to rent at HUD fair market value. That's not the same as fair market value. It's not, it's substantially less. But still, we felt that the people would exit the 5-year. So we put this requirement on, and it means that, let's say in a year, you've appropriated 3 million. 30% of 3 million is what? Whatever. 1 million. No, it's a little less than 1 million would have to be spent on the 5-year program. I want to tell you, the reason for all this reporting, there's a lot of reporting in the bill, is because we're in a very difficult situation because Section 8 vouchers are disappearing. There's not as many as there were. And so without a Section 8 voucher, a lot of homeless individuals or families cannot afford even a fair market value. And so it's not clear that this program will continue to continue to be a successful off-ramp for the homeless as it has been. And if that's the case, we want to know about it. We really want to know about it. So this is just a start. We're saying start with at least 30%. The department thinks if they can place more, they will place more, they assert. But the 30% is a hard no. The bond bank, the only thing I can say about the bond bank is whatever the number that in your wisdom you wish to give to them will be multiplied many times. That's why this is the one place besides VHCB, which I'll get to, the one place where we put more money because it's just going to get multiplied. They're not going to turn around. Let's say that you give them $7 million or 9 million. Let's use the 9 million. They're not going to just lend out the 9 million for infrastructure. They'll use their other money, that's 7% money, and use that and use this money to buy down interest rates. Or they will go to Northfield Savings and say, you loan the money and we'll underwrite the loan. They multiply the loan through public-private partnership.
We had
You had,
and he was great, and it was helpful to know about the $660 million pool.
right. The first time, first generation home buyers, the down payment assistance program, just how that works, they're really kind of apples and oranges. The down payment assistance program literally gives very low interest loans to home buyers to reduce the down. And the idea was, remember, they have to pay back the loan. It's a loan. So they have to pay it back. And the idea was originally that hopefully in 5 years, the paybacks would be enough so that it would be self-sustaining and they wouldn't need any more, which is why it sunsets now. The problem is the price of housing has gone up so far, and for various factors, it's just not working. It's not producing. They need an extra 5 years to be sure, they think, and Maura Collins testified to this, that the loan program will become self-sufficient. So for the first time, for the loans for first-time down payment assistance for first-time home buyers, the intention is that it become a revolving fund and be sustaining. The first generation program is different. First of all, a lot of the first generation home buyers are minorities, people of color. And that was one of the things that frankly attracted us to us because there aren't very many programs. BHCB has some, but there aren't very many programs that are focused like that. But that's a grant program. And so consequently, the tax savings are sold and the money is used as like a $15,000 grant to true first generation home buyers. The landlord certificate and CAMA, the whole CAMA thing where you get information. I just want to tell you that what happened was, I think I mentioned this before, the rental registry was originally in our bill, but you may remember that was very controversial, divisive. And so we looked around for other ways of getting this data. And it turns out that the rental registry that landlords already file with a little modification and the data that are collected by local towns, if you marry them and Department of Housing and Community Development thinks they can, you produce almost all of the information that would have been in the rental registry, and that's a win-win. The offsite report, $250,000. Madam Chair, yes. We asked exactly the same question you asked with exactly the same level of skepticism. And Maura Collins came in and all I can say is, well, it's not all I can say. She convinced us. And the reason is the report, it's kind of frustrating. The report was an excellent report, but it had a whole page of recommended things you have to study. This is going to be pretty complicated to implement if we really want to do it. For example, the state could guarantee like 50 units if they were purchased by Champlain Housing Trust or by a large private developer. There's all kinds of ways we could have a role without spending the money, but they have to be identified. And this report just went halfway. So what Ms. Collins said is we asked her, okay, so how many of these 10 recommendations can you do? She said, we can do all of them. We don't need you need us? No, we just need one FTE and some consultant money. And that's what the 250,000 is. VHCB, yes, our recommendation for 25 million in addition to their base, it comes because in prior years, VHCB has had additional funds beyond the base of at least $60 million. And we don't have the kind of federal funding we used to have, but every dollar they've gotten, they have spent. And they're spending it on, there are people here who will tell you better than me, but they're multiplying maybe 3 to 1. But they are the place that people who are at 60 and 80% of AMI have to go to get housing. So the less money we give them, the less housing we're going to build. It's that simple. As to the Vermont State, the whole idea of giving Vermont State colleges and the Department of Labor money, where that came from is we kept hearing testimony that if we do not increase the number of carpenters and other tradespeople that are in Vermont, we can talk till we're blue in the face about housing and we're not going to produce it. We don't have enough people. So we asked ourselves, what could we do? Well, I can tell you that the committee, the Economic Development Committee is working really hard on this. They're working with CTE. We collaborated with them. We had some joint hearings. This was 2 ideas of things we could do now that would really help. HVAC, it's not, you need a certificate, and it is important because as we get, hopefully, more and more weatherized homes in Vermont, if you have a sealed weatherized home, you need air circulation devices, air exchangers. If they break, I know, I have one, it broke. There's nobody around right now it's very hard to get someone to replace. The recovery residences was straightened out. I think Representative Bloomley understands full well this was new money. And we didn't want to take it from, we worked with the chair of Human Services. We did not want to mess in any way with the opioid fund because there was a whole process for determining that. And so these are 2 recommendations that come in addition out of the general fund. And they have to do with the fact that there's just a huge shortage in this state of recovery residences. And they're very effective and there are too few. I think, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer questions, but one other thing, we did include new money, the jobs, that's new money. The home share is new money, but it just struck us what a win-win home share is. The people moving into homes it doesn't cost anything. I mean, this is administrative. They're paying rent, but they're low income. And of course, they're letting people stay in their houses.
It's sort of a homelessness prevention strategy.
Yeah, it's a homelessness and also allowing elderly people to stay in their homes. So that's my statement. I'm happy to answer questions.
Wayne.
The home share, interesting idea to me. Hasn't been very much money. Have any feedback on how well it's been accepted?
Yes, we took testimony. It's the testimony is so positive, it makes you wonder. No, really, it's incredibly positive. Very, very high. I mean, you would think it would be a problem, wouldn't you, to have somebody move into your house and it's living there, but they screen people, they mediate if there's a problem. The satisfaction rates are like incredibly high. And it seems to be a really good program.
That's the way it used to be in the 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
And John?
So the 373 to Vermont State Colleges, apprenticeships, curriculum development, employer partnerships, faculty training, that they were heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. many people would you need to be, in those faculty?
You know, I
You get
don't-
a sense, you don't have to.
How many in faculty?
Right, well, it says.
You know, the way they,
Training.
yeah, the way these programs work, and there's like just shy of 1,000 people, students right now in this internship program. They are working full-time for some employer. It marries an employer with someone who wants to learn the skills. The employer does a lot of the teaching, and then there are night classes and online classes that supplement that. Yeah, and they would become the faculty, yes.
Any other questions? Teddy, do you want to, you took out the short-term rental uses. Is that sort of the main, I can't remember. You did some stuff with tax credits. Why don't you explain a little bit about what the committee's thinking was of what you were doing here?
Yes, thank you. So on the tax credit sunset, that was more of a, rather than doing it in perpetuity, the sunset allows the legislature to evaluate the usage and effectiveness of that tax credit in 5 years. So it was not a statement of support or non-support for the tax credit, but more if we put a sunset in, 5 years from now, we'll be able to take a look, see if it's working the way it is, and then the future legislature can make that decision. So that's the first and second instance of amendment. The third instance of amendment, as you said, was the repeal or removal of the extra 1% local options on the short-term rentals. And we heard from the tax department that it would be very administratively challenging for.
Do that, yeah.
Yeah, and we also, and that was the main, but we also took testimony from the Short-Term Rental Association. They had concerns as well.
I'm sure they do.
As you would expect.
I would have been surprised if they had.
But I would say that the main reason the committee decided to take that out is that tax reported that it would be very administratively challenging. There are a lot of unanswered questions. Would that be considered also a room, or is it not a room in rooms and meals senses? And yeah, so it would just, they reported it would be very challenging. And then the fourth instance of amendment was the effective dates, which lets the Universal Design Study Committee start upon passage. So that was why wait until July to let the committee start to do their work. And then the second was the sunset of the tax credit.
Any questions?
And sorry, it was 10-1-0.
Thank you. I forgot to ask that. Jim, you forgot to ask that.
Madam
So
Chair.
what was yours, Mark, and your, yeah.
Madam Chair, we haven't taken yet a straw poll on this amendment.
But on your, it came out of your committee, it was.
10-1.
10-1.
But I can say that we realized when we passed, as you can see, the major difference is they took out the short-term rental. We knew that it was, we felt, we knew what our intention was, but we didn't know how to do it. And that's pretty much what we said
So you
to
sent it
the
to us,
committee.
yeah.
We said in our transmittal to the committee, we defer to your expertise. And they decided in the exercise of their expertise that it wasn't ready for prime time, period. Which, I'll see, but I don't think my committee will be surprised. The 5-year, I take some responsibility for the 5-year sunset in a conversation with one of the members of its committee. It's come up with that idea as a compromise. What my committee will say, I don't know.
And the 30% on that ratio was, had there been a number before ever, or was it the first time?
No, what happened was, and because the issue hadn't arisen, because the 10-year program had the same requirements for the last year.
It's still
as the 5-year.
Right.
Yeah.
Before that, that wasn't true, because Mike remembers being in a different set. I seem to remember you.
There was only the 5-year.
Well, at one point you got 30,000 if you had it for so many years, and 50,000 if you had it for so many more years, or
That's changed.
Right, that's what I mean.
Well, and the program has evolved, and in some ways, I think well.
Yeah.
But one of the things we really want to know, I think in some ways, the data request is the most important part of the bill. What we want to know is what happens to these? These units are going to pop out in 5 years, creating all kinds of issues. when you don't have permanent affordability, you have to face up to this reality. You're using government money to support an idea when you know that 5 years from now or 10 years from now, something is going to happen. It's one of the attractions of VHCB. It's that it's permanent affordability, but we wanted to know what happens to these units.
Jim?
Mark, appreciate all the work that you've done in this and the variety of areas, which will mean a lot to how we ever figure out what collectively we can fit into our box.
Right.
I asked earlier about the new money you had for VHCB, and evidently there's some language that we're using that focus on housing. I think
It's our intention, Jim. It was our intention that that money is only for housing.
I appreciate that. I agree. We got a serious housing shortage, and we're trying to do everything we can within our means to get more housing developed and built. I think, I don't know if it's the first time or second time, we're actually able to, and the governor's recommend to propose the base budget in line with what was intended, evidently, for right along in terms of the breakdown of the property transfer tax. And I think it's what, 35 million maybe, give or take, for VHCB?
37.
37?
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a lot better than it was, say, a few years ago when we struggled to, and we had to rely on this one-time fund. Did your committee consider any language? Because we heard earlier this session that maybe 30% of that goes to land conservation, which may be a very worthy goal, but that may not be the emergency that we're facing in housing. Did you look at, on a temporary basis, of maybe limiting that amount that they do for land conservation right now?
No. I will say, having spent a lot of my life in California, that Vermont is unique among states in that the conservation community and the housing community are not at war with each other constantly at a level of an amazing level of intensity that occurs elsewhere. And that is because one agency does both. It's literally a unique concept.
Any other questions? Well, I really appreciate all the work that your committee has done. Guys, it's complicated. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot to learn and understand. You have a lot of new committee members. And this is really helpful, as Jim said. It will help us a lot in understanding what all the pieces are and how we're going to make our decisions.
It does occur to me, I should tell you, you're not discussing appeals. That's fine. I will tell you that we did discuss the appeals at length. There, in a drive-by in the Environment Committee. And the Environment Committee took almost 4 hours of testimony during the drive-by. And the vote in the Environment Committee, or flyby,
It's a walk by.
walk-by, whatever.
Of course.
The vote there was 11-0.
Okay, on the appeals piece.
A straw poll.
So, yeah, yes. Okay, great.
Pleasure. Thank you. Good luck.
Okay, one more question
One
from
more
Lynn.
question. When you did the thing with the VHIP, did you hear from landlords or landlord associations, and what was their response?
Very supportive. Very supportive. I would say the program has a lot of support. It has evolved. It is not the same as it was. It is not perfect because it is not permanently affordable. I mean, if you take the number of years and you take the affordability, the value of the units, and divide them by 5 and say that's an affordable year, it doesn't look so great compared to perpetually affordable. But it does work. It's a way of getting money out quickly. It's still less than, some other options, but it isn't permanently affordable. So it's not perfect, but it's definitely supported by the landlord community.
I was thinking of churn.
Yeah.
Tenant churn. And the tenancy, if you have a good tenant, keep them there without really trying to raise the rent. I mean, something that would be effective thing for a landlord.
We considered taking on the landlord-tenant issue. Shall we say the landlord-tenant set of issues? And looked at the amount of time available to us and decided that it would be a fool's errand to do so this. It is something we will be looking at in the future.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Committees, we appreciate it.
Thank you in advance to you guys. And good luck.
It's been since you've been here, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ledge Council, Cameron and James and Jay during fiscal, we appreciate it. Committee, we're gonna take a break. We have some work that people are doing to get ready for the budget. What do you think, Jim? Time. Checking back in. I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I know, I'm probably not the close, I found that maybe
All right.
last night, can we text if we ready earlier?
Yeah,
Okay.
just give me a text. So we'll definitely be back here by 5. More chances to get snacks and food if one needs to. But we'll be back at 5. Goal to try to get through these numbers today. So we probably all need a little break.